My name is Richard Pierce. I'm 62 years old, and on the day my wife's will was read, my sons divided $30 million between themselves like they were splitting a poker pot. Timothy got the construction companies. Benjamin inherited the restaurant chain, the estates, the luxury condos, the sports cars, everything. Absolutely everything. And I, after 45 years of building that empire from scratch with my own two hands, after losing the love of my life to cancer just a week ago, received a dusty envelope that looked like something you'd find forgotten in your basement. My daughter-in-law Amanda laughed right in my face and said, "At least you can use it for old receipts, Dad." Timothy didn't even look at me. Benjamin sighed like my very existence was some kind of burden he had to tolerate. Humiliated and confused, I walked out of that law office feeling like 45 years of back-breaking work meant absolutely nothing. But what they didn't know was that when I opened that despised envelope tonight in my empty house, I would discover something that would flip their world completely upside down. Louise had died just 7 days ago. Pancreatic cancer took her in 6 brutal months. For 45 years, she'd been my partner, my rock, the woman who stood by me when I was building this empire with my bare hands, starting with nothing but a beat-up pickup truck and more determination than sense. I remember those early days when I'd leave the house at 5 a.m. with my tool belt and lunch bucket, coming home after dark, covered in concrete dust and sawdust. We started with one construction crew in that old Ford pickup. Louise handled the books, the permits, the endless phone calls when I was out on job sites from dawn to dark. When I expanded into restaurants 15 years ago, she designed the layouts, hired the first managers, made sure every location had that family atmosphere that made people want to come back. She had an eye for detail that I never possessed. While I was good with concrete and steel, she understood people, understood what made a business feel welcoming and successful. Together, we built something real, something worth $80 million, though nobody knew the true number except Louise and me. The official businesses, the ones listed in corporate filings and tax documents, were worth about $30 million on paper. But Louise was smarter than anyone gave her credit for. Over the years, she'd been quietly moving money, creating offshore accounts, building a financial fortress that only she controlled. The will reading happened at Patricia Henderson's law office downtown on 5th Street. I showed up in my best suit, the navy one Louise bought me for our 40th anniversary last year. I figured it would be straightforward. The boys would get the businesses to run. I'd get enough to live comfortably in retirement, and we'd all move forward together as a family. Patricia started reading in that cold professional lawyer voice. Her office was all mahogany and leather, with law books lining the walls and a view of downtown Cleveland through floor-to-ceiling windows. To my son Timothy, she began, "I leave the construction companies valued at $15 million, including all equipment, contracts, and accounts receivable." Timothy grinned like he'd just won the lottery. To my son Benjamin, "I leave the restaurant chain generating $8 million annually, including all properties, franchise agreements, and brand assets." Benjamin leaned back in his leather chair, completely satisfied with his windfall. I could see Amanda next to Timothy, practically glowing with excitement. The downtown commercial properties, the vacation homes, the company vehicles, the main business accounts, everything got methodically divided between my two sons. $30 million in total assets split equally while I sat there feeling invisible, waiting to hear what my wife had left for the man who'd helped build every dollar of it. When Patricia finished reading that endless list, she paused and looked at some additional papers. "For Mr. Richard Pierce," she said, "I leave this personal envelope with my deepest love and gratitude for our 45 years together." She reached across her massive desk and handed me a yellow, dusty envelope that felt like it had been sitting in storage for years. The thing was wrinkled and stained, like something you'd find in an old shoebox in your attic. I took it with hands that were starting to shake, while my sons exchanged those satisfied looks that said they'd gotten everything they'd hoped for. Amanda couldn't contain herself. "At least you can use it for old receipts, Dad," she said with that fake sweetness that barely covered her contempt. "Maybe some old photos or something sentimental?" Timothy was already buried deep in legal documents, probably calculating how quickly he could access his new wealth. Benjamin just sighed, as if my presence at my own wife's will reading was something he had to endure rather than respect. The envelope felt practically empty in my hands. It felt like a cruel joke, like 45 years of marriage and partnership had been reduced to whatever scrap of sentiment Louise had left me as consolation. Patricia closed the will folder and immediately started explaining to my sons the complex legal procedures for taking possession of their substantial inheritance. Wire transfers, property deeds, corporate restructuring, tax implications. They talked around me like I was a piece of furniture that happened to be in the room. I stood up slowly, my knees creaking like they always did after sitting too long, put that pathetic envelope in my jacket pocket, and headed for the door. Nobody said goodbye, nobody asked if I needed a ride home or if I had any questions about the proceedings. Nobody seemed to care that their father and husband had just been essentially written out of the family legacy like a bad debt that needed to be forgotten. I walked through downtown Cleveland, past the office buildings I'd helped construct in the 1980s and 1990s, past the restaurants that bore my family's name and reputation. The autumn air was crisp and clean, but I felt smaller and more insignificant than I had since I was a scared kid growing up in the housing projects on the east side, wondering if I'd ever amount to anything. That envelope in my jacket pocket felt like it weighed nothing and everything at the same time. Every step reminded me that it was there, this final insult disguised as a loving gesture. The streets were full of people heading home from work, couples walking hand in hand, families with strollers, all of them living normal lives while mine had just imploded in a lawyer's office. Back home in our house, my house now, I guess. I sat in my old recliner with a cold beer and stared at that envelope for what must have been an hour. The silence was crushing. Louise's reading glasses were still on the end table next to her chair. Her coffee mug was still in the sink from the morning she'd gone into the hospital for the last time. Her romance novels were still stacked on her nightstand, bookmarked with grocery store receipts and sticky notes. Everything in that house reminded me that I was truly alone now, apparently with nothing to show for a lifetime of work except the clothes on my back and whatever sentimental nonsense was in this envelope. The beer tasted flat. The house felt too big and too quiet. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to be ticking louder than usual, counting down the remaining years I had left. Finally, around 10 p.m., I couldn't stand the suspense anymore. I tore open that envelope with shaking fingers, half expecting to find an old photo or maybe a short note telling me she loved me. Instead, there was a single sheet of Louise's personal stationery with her elegant handwriting covering both sides. That beautiful script I'd seen on grocery lists and anniversary cards and birthday notes for decades. But this time, the words made my heart stop completely. For the man who always truly loved me. Swiss International Bank, Geneva, account number 847291CHE. What you find here is only the beginning. They didn't deserve to know the truth, but you do. All my love forever, Louise, a Swiss bank account. What in God's name was Louise talking about? In 45 years of marriage, we discussed every major financial decision together, at least I thought we had. She'd always been meticulous about our finances, handling the bookkeeping and investments while I focused on the day-to-day operations of building and running the businesses. But a secret Swiss account, what truth didn't my sons deserve to know? I stared at that piece of paper until my eyes burned and the numbers started blurring together. I read it again and again, trying to make sense of what Louise was trying to communicate from beyond the grave. This wasn't just some sentimental gesture or old photo. This was something significant, something she'd planned carefully before her death. I couldn't sleep that night. I paced the house until dawn, holding that paper like it might disintegrate if I let go of it. When the sun finally came up over Lake Erie, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my fourth cup of coffee, still trying to process what I'd discovered. At exactly 6 a.m. Eastern Time, which meant it was noon in Switzerland, I called the international number for Swiss International Bank. My rusty high school French got me nowhere with the first operator, but they quickly transferred me to someone in their international department who spoke perfect English. I gave them the account number, my full name, social security number, and answered about a dozen security questions about my wife's maiden name, our wedding date, and other personal information that only the legitimate account holder would know. After a wait that felt like an eternity, with classical music playing softly in my ear, I heard the words that would change the rest of my life. Mr. Pierce, the current balance in your account is $50 million US dollars. The phone slipped out of my hand and clattered onto the kitchen floor like a stone. $50 million. $50 million, nearly twice what my sons had inherited combined. I sat on my kitchen floor in my bathrobe, shaking like I had hypothermia, trying to process what I'd just heard. Louise had left me a secret fortune, a fortune that made the $30 million from the official will look like a decent inheritance instead of the lion's share. But that wasn't the end of it. When I finally managed to pick up the phone, the banker was still there. Sir, are you still there? I also need to inform you that we have instructions to courier a safe deposit box that your wife deposited with us 2 years ago. We can schedule delivery for tomorrow if that's convenient for you. A safe deposit box, deposited 2 years ago, right around the time Louise was first diagnosed with cancer. What else had my wife been planning? What other secrets was I about to discover? What had she been thinking about during those long nights when she couldn't sleep because of the pain medication? I managed to croak out that yes, tomorrow would be fine, and hung up with hands that were trembling so badly I could barely hold the phone. How had Louise accumulated $50 million without me knowing about it? Why had she kept it completely secret from me, her husband of 45 years? And most importantly, what truth was it that my sons apparently didn't deserve to know? I spent the rest of that day walking around my house like a zombie, picking up Louise's things and trying to understand the woman I'd been married to for nearly half a century. Had she been planning this for years? Had she somehow known that our sons would betray me after her death? Had she seen something in Timothy and Benjamin that I'd been too blind or too trusting to notice? The courier arrived the next morning at exactly 10 a.m. Professional guy in an expensive suit, driving a black Mercedes with diplomatic plates, carrying a small but obviously heavy safe with a digital combination lock. He was polite but efficient, asking for multiple forms of identification before he'd even take the safe out of his car. The combination, he explained, was in a sealed envelope that came with very specific instructions about when and how to open it. I signed about a dozen forms, provided thumbprint verification, and answered more security questions before he was satisfied that I was the legitimate recipient. The safe itself was about the size of a large briefcase, made from some kind of brushed steel that looked expensive and virtually indestructible. The courier placed it on my dining room table, handed me the sealed envelope with the combination, and left without another word. I locked the front door, closed all the curtains, and unplugged the house phone. Whatever was in this safe, I needed privacy to discover it. The sealed envelope contained a single slip of paper with 6 numbers, 061579. Our wedding date, June 15, 1979. Classic Louise, always sentimental even when dealing with the most serious business. I sat in my dining room, staring at the safe that might contain answers to questions I didn't even know I should be asking. My hands were shaking as I dialed the combination and heard the mechanism click open with a soft mechanical hum. Inside were stacks of documents, manila folders, photographs, small digital recording devices, and a thick envelope marked Richard read this, first in Louise's unmistakable handwriting. My heart was pounding like a jackhammer as I opened that envelope and started reading what would become the most shocking letter of my entire life. My dearest Richard, it began in Louise's elegant script. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and our sons have shown their true colors at the will reading. I know they humiliated you today. I know they treated you like garbage. I know Amanda laughed at you when they handed you that dusty envelope. But I needed it to happen exactly this way. I needed them to reveal who they really are before you learned the truth about what I've discovered. The room started spinning around me. What truth? What had Louise discovered? I forced myself to keep reading, even though every instinct told me I wasn't prepared for what was coming. During the last 2 years of my life while I was fighting cancer and trying to get my affairs in order, I discovered things about Timothy and Benjamin that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. Things you don't know about, things that forced me to make decisions I never wanted to make. The $50 million you found in that Swiss account is only part of our real wealth. There's more. But before you learn about the rest, you need to understand the truth about our sons. I had to stop reading. I felt like I was going to be sick. My perfect sons, the boys I'd raised to take over the family businesses, the men I'd trusted with my legacy. What had they done? What had Louise discovered that was so terrible she'd hidden it from me while she was dying? I forced myself to continue. Timothy isn't the successful businessman he appears to be, Richard. For the past 3 years, he's been systematically stealing money from your construction companies to cover massive gambling debts. He owes over $2 million to loan sharks who don't accept payment plans. Amanda doesn't know the full extent of it, but he secretly mortgaged their house twice and is about to lose it. He's been creating fake invoices, skimming cash from job sites, and even selling equipment and reporting it as stolen. All the evidence is in this safe. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach with a sledgehammer. My oldest son, the one I'd been grooming to take over the construction business since he was old enough to hold a hammer, was a gambling addict who'd been stealing from the companies I'd spent decades building. But Louise's letter wasn't finished destroying my world. Benjamin's situation is even worse, if that's possible. He's had a serious cocaine addiction for the past 5 years that he's been hiding from everyone, including you. He's secretly sold 3 of the properties I gave him over the years to finance his drug habit. But the most dangerous part is that he's gotten involved with drug dealers who are now blackmailing him. They've threatened to kill him if he doesn't pay them $500,000 by Christmas. The proof of his debts, photos of his drug use, and recordings of his conversations with these criminals are all in this safe. I had to put the letter down. I couldn't breathe. My younger son was mixed up with drug dealers who were threatening to kill him. How had I missed all of this? How had Louise known when I, their father, had been completely oblivious to their problems? But the letter wasn't finished destroying everything I thought I knew about my family. What hurts me most, Richard, more than the cancer, more than knowing I won't see you grow old, is what they've planned to do with you after I'm gone. Last month, I overheard them talking in Timothy's kitchen when they thought I was in the bathroom taking my medication. Amanda was explaining how easy it would be to have you declared mentally incompetent once I died. He's old, he's grieving, he'll be confused and vulnerable, she said. Any doctor would sign the papers if we explain how worried we are about his mental state. The letter became blurry as tears started rolling down my cheeks. My own sons, my own flesh and blood, had been planning to have me declared incompetent. Timothy agreed it was the perfect solution to their financial problems. They want to put you in a nursing home and take control of your share of the inheritance. Amanda even researched specific facilities. They've already contacted doctors and lawyers about the process. They see you as an obstacle to getting the money they need to solve their problems. I had to stop reading and walk around the house for 10 minutes trying to process what I'd just learned. When I finally calmed down enough to continue, Louise's letter explained her strategy. That's why I moved the bulk of our real wealth offshore, Richard. That's why I let them believe they were getting everything in the official will while you got access to the real money. The $50 million in that Swiss account is just what I could move quickly and safely. There are properties in Europe, investments in Asia, accounts in 3 different countries. In total, I estimate our true net worth at over $80 million, and all of it is now under your sole control. $80 million, nearly 3 times what my sons had inherited. But more important than the money was what Louise had left me along with it. I also leave you something more valuable than money, the complete truth about our sons, and the evidence to prove it. Everything is in this safe. Financial records, photographs, audio recordings, legal documents. You have enough proof to destroy them completely if you choose to use it. Or you can use it to save them from themselves and force them to become the men we always hoped they could be. That choice is entirely yours. The letter ended with words that burned themselves into my memory. I can't protect you anymore, Richard, but I've given you all the weapons you need to protect yourself. Use them wisely. Use them with the strength I know you have, even if you've forgotten it's there. With all my eternal love, Louise. I sat in that dining room for the rest of the afternoon, surrounded by the contents of Louise's safe. There were manila folders labeled with dates going back 3 years, photographs that showed my sons in situations I never could have imagined, audio recording devices smaller than credit cards, bank statements and financial documents that told the story of systematic theft and deception. The photographs were the hardest to look at. Benjamin in what was obviously a drug dealer's apartment, snorting cocaine off a glass table while men in expensive suits watched. Timothy stumbling out of an illegal gambling den at 3 a.m., clearly drunk, with 2 men who were obviously not legitimate business people. Amanda kissing a younger man in a hotel parking lot. Not Timothy, but some guy I'd never seen before. The financial documents told an even more devastating story. Fake invoices for construction materials that were never delivered. Cash withdrawals from business accounts that coincided with Timothy's gambling losses. Property deeds showing that Benjamin had quietly sold valuable real estate and pocketed the money. Bank statements showing wire transfers to offshore accounts that had nothing to do with legitimate business. But the audio recordings were what really broke my heart. Louise had somehow managed to record conversations between our sons over the past year, probably using those small digital devices I'd found in the safe. I listened to Timothy explaining to Benjamin how easy it would be to have me declared incompetent. I heard Amanda coaching Timothy on what to tell doctors about my supposed mental decline. I heard Benjamin discussing his drug debts with people who spoke in the kind of casual threats that made my blood run cold. The worst recording was from just 2 weeks before Louise died. Timothy's voice, clear as day. Once Mom's gone and we get the old man put away, we can liquidate everything and move somewhere warm. With $50 million between us, we can live like kings in Florida or maybe the Caribbean. Benjamin's response was even more chilling. We just need to move fast on getting Dad declared incompetent. My dealers are getting impatient about the money I owe them. If I don't pay soon, they're going to start hurting people I care about. They'd been planning to rob me and abandon me while I was grieving my wife's death. They'd been planning to steal everything Louise and I had built together and use it to solve problems they'd created through their own stupidity and addiction. Over the next few days, I studied every document. Louise had left me like I was preparing for the most important exam of my life. She'd been incredibly thorough. She'd hired private investigators to follow our sons without them knowing. She'd recorded phone conversations. She'd photographed secret meetings. She'd traced financial transactions and documented every theft, every lie, every betrayal. Louise had spent her final months building an airtight case against our own children while fighting cancer and trying to protect me from a truth she knew would destroy me. She'd been playing chess while the rest of us were playing checkers, preparing for a game that would determine the future of our family and everything we'd worked for. Among all those documents, I found something that made my blood freeze in my veins, a contract between my sons and Sunset Manor Senior Living, a private nursing home about 2 hours outside Cleveland. They'd already paid a $5,000 deposit to reserve a room for me. The contract was dated just 10 days before Louise's death. They'd been planning to lock me away before their mother was even buried. I also found the business cards and contact information for the lawyers and doctors they'd already consulted about having me declared mentally incompetent. They'd done their homework. They'd researched the legal process, identified the right people to bribe or convince, and developed a timeline for executing their plan as soon as Louise was out of the picture. But Louise had been watching and documenting everything. The phone started ringing on the third day after I'd opened the safe. Timothy, calling with that fake concerned voice he uses when he wants something from me. Dad, how are you holding up? We're worried about you. You've been awfully quiet since Mom's funeral. Worried about me, that was Rich. They were worried, all right, worried that I might somehow interfere with their plan to rob me blind. I'm managing, I told him, just trying to process everything that's happened. That's understandable, Dad. Losing Mom was hard on all of us, but it's not healthy for you to be alone in that big house, especially when you're grieving. Amanda and I have been talking, and we think it might be good for you to consider some other living arrangements. Somewhere you'd have companionship and wouldn't have to worry about taking care of a house. There it was. The setup was beginning exactly as Louise had predicted it would. What kind of arrangements are you thinking about? I asked, playing along. Well, there are some very nice senior communities where you'd have people your own age to talk to, activities to keep you busy, medical care if you need it, places where you wouldn't have to worry about cooking or cleaning or maintaining a property, places like Sunset Manor, I thought, where they'd already paid the deposit to warehouse me while they spent my money. That afternoon, Benjamin called with essentially the same script. Timothy told me you talked this morning. I think he's absolutely right about finding you a more appropriate living situation. His voice sounded nervous and rehearsed, like he was reading from notes Amanda had written for him. Besides, Dad, we should probably talk about the house and your finances. The upkeep on a place that size is expensive, and at your age, it doesn't make sense to tie up so much money in real estate. It would be smarter to sell and invest that money in your care. Sell the house where Louise and I had lived for 30 years. Liquidate the last physical reminder of our life together so they could get their hands on whatever cash they could squeeze out of me. Over the following week, the pressure campaign intensified exactly as Louise had predicted it would. Timothy, Benjamin, and Amanda took turns calling me, visiting me, always with brochures for senior living facilities and carefully rehearsed expressions of concern about my safety and well-being. They'd show up at my door unannounced, always in pairs, always with those glossy pamphlets and worried looks that barely concealed their eagerness to get the plan moving. Look at this place, Dad, Amanda would say, spreading brochures across my kitchen table like she was planning a vacation. They have physical therapy, game rooms, movie nights, organized trips to the casino. You'd have so much more social interaction than you do here by yourself. But I'd already researched Sunset Manor online. The reviews were horrific. Families complained about neglect, terrible food, understaffed medical care, and administrators who treated residents like prisoners rather than human beings who'd earned respect and dignity. It was exactly the kind of place where inconvenient elderly relatives got deposited and forgotten. The food looks institutional, I told them during one of their unannounced visits, and the reviews online are pretty negative. Oh, Dad, Timothy said with a patronizing smile. You can't believe everything you read on the internet. Those review sites are full of disgruntled families who expect 5-star hotel service for their relatives. This is a practical solution for your situation. My situation. Like I was a problem that needed to be solved rather than their father who deserved their love and respect. One evening, during what they insisted on calling a family dinner, but felt more like an intervention, I decided to test them by pretending to consider their proposal. You know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe it is time to think about making some changes. But before I make any decisions about where to live, I'd like to understand exactly what's happening with the businesses I spent 45 years building. Their faces lit up like Christmas morning. They thought I was finally giving in to their pressure. Of course, Dad, Timothy said with enthusiasm that was probably genuine for the first time in months. What do you want to know? I want to review all the financial statements for the past 3 years. I want to understand how the companies have been performing, what challenges you've been facing, what the long-term prospects look like. After all, these businesses are my life's work. The enthusiasm vanished immediately. Timothy and Benjamin exchanged nervous looks like kids who'd just been asked about their report cards. Dad, you don't need to worry about all that boring business stuff, Benjamin said quickly. We've got everything under control. You should focus on enjoying your retirement. But I insist, I continued, watching their faces carefully. I have a right to know how the companies are doing. I built them from nothing, and I want to understand what kind of legacy I'm leaving behind. Amanda jumped in with that condescending smile that I was beginning to hate more than anything in the world. Richard, financial reports are incredibly complicated. Balance sheets and profit and loss statements and tax implications. It's all very technical. It would just stress you out unnecessarily. Technical. I'd been reading financial reports since before Amanda was born. I'd built a multi-million-dollar empire by understanding exactly those kinds of technical details that she apparently thought were beyond my comprehension. Besides, Timothy added, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, we've already had to make some important decisions about the businesses. We sold the Westside commercial property last week to cover some outstanding debts. Sold a property? I asked, feeling my anger start to build. What kind of debts required selling prime real estate? Louise had been dead for less than a month, and they were already liquidating assets to cover Timothy's gambling debts and Benjamin's drug expenses. Just routine business expenses. Dad, payroll, insurance, maintenance, supplier invoices. Nothing you need to worry about. But I knew exactly what kind of routine expenses had required the emergency sale of valuable real estate. Timothy needed cash to pay his loan sharks before they broke his legs. Benjamin needed money to keep his drug dealers from carrying out their threats, and they were using the family businesses like their personal ATM machine. That night, sitting alone in the house that Louise and I had filled with 45 years of memories, I made the decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to be the helpless victim they expected me to be. I had $80 million in assets they didn't know about, evidence of their crimes that could destroy them, and something they'd seriously underestimated, 45 years of experience building and running successful businesses. I knew how to plan, how to strategize, how to outthink competitors who underestimated me. It was time to remind my sons who they were dealing with. The next morning, I called Charles Williams, the attorney Louise had hired to handle her secret arrangements. She'd mentioned him in one of her letters, describing him as a man who specialized in protecting wealthy families from exactly the kind of problems we were facing. Charles came to my house that afternoon, distinguished gentleman in his early 60s with silver hair and the kind of expensive suit that suggested he dealt with serious money on a regular basis. He carried a leather briefcase that looked like it cost more than most people's cars, and he had the confident demeanor of someone who'd spent decades protecting wealthy clients from their own family members. Mr. Pierce, he said as we sat in my living room, your wife asked me to give you this exactly 2 weeks after her death. He handed me yet another manila folder, this one containing legal documents that I couldn't immediately understand. These papers grant you 51% controlling interest in all the family businesses. Charles explained as I tried to process the legalese. On paper, your sons inherited operational control of the individual companies. But in reality, all of those companies are subsidiaries of a parent holding company called Pierce Family Enterprises. And you, Mr. Pierce, are the sole owner of that holding company. My head was spinning as I tried to understand what he was telling me. How is that possible? The will was very specific about what Timothy and Benjamin inherited. That will only covered the visible assets, Charles explained patiently. Your wife spent the last 2 years of her life creating an incredibly complex corporate structure designed to protect you and the family wealth from exactly this situation. Your sons think they own their respective companies outright, but legally, they're essentially high-level managers working for you. Louise had been playing 4D chess while the rest of us thought we were playing checkers. She'd created the perfect legal trap disguised as a generous inheritance that satisfied my son's greed while secretly ensuring that I maintained ultimate control over everything we'd built together. There's more, Charles continued, opening another section of his briefcase. Your wife hired a team of private investigators to document your son's activities over the past 3 years. What they discovered is enough to not only void their inheritances completely, but also initiate criminal proceedings against both of them. He showed me professional surveillance photos I hadn't seen in Louise's safe. High-resolution images of Timothy meeting with known loan sharks in the parking lot of a downtown casino. Benjamin exchanging briefcases full of cash with men who were obviously drug dealers. Financial documents proving systematic theft from the family businesses going back years. Your wife also had us install sophisticated surveillance equipment in both of your sons' homes and offices, Charles continued. We have audio recordings of them discussing their plan to have you declared mentally incompetent. We have video footage of them meeting with lawyers and doctors about the process. We have documented proof of their conspiracy to commit elder abuse and financial fraud. He pulled out a small digital device and played an audio recording that made my blood pressure spike immediately. Timothy's voice crystal clear. The beauty of the incompetency route is that once we get the court order, Dad loses all legal rights to make decisions about his money. We become his conservators, which means we control everything. He'll never even know what hit him. Amanda's voice responded, and if he tries to fight it, that just proves he's mentally unstable. Right? It's the perfect crime. Perfect crime. My own family was talking about robbing me like it was some kind of sophisticated heist, rather than the ultimate betrayal of everything I'd given them. The surveillance also captured some very interesting footage of your daughter-in-law. Charles continued with a slight smile. Apparently, Amanda has been having an affair with a personal trainer named Nicholas Thompson for the past 8 months. She's also been systematically stealing money from Timothy's accounts to fund a lavish lifestyle he doesn't know about. He showed me photographs of Amanda with a muscular young man who was definitely not my son. They were kissing in restaurant parking lots, checking into hotels together, shopping for expensive jewelry that she was apparently buying with stolen money. Timothy had no idea that his wife was not only cheating on him, but also robbing him blind while planning to help lock away his father. What do you recommend I do with all this information? I asked Charles. He leaned back in his chair with the confident expression of a man who'd handled these situations many times before. Your wife asked me to give you a specific message. She said, tell Richard that he's stronger and smarter than they think, and it's time they learned who they're really dealing with. That night, I sat in my study looking at my reflection in the dark window. I saw a 62-year-old man with gray hair and lines that told the story of 45 years of hard work and honest business. But I also saw something I'd forgotten existed, the fighter who'd built an empire from nothing, the man who'd outworked, outthought, and outlasted every competitor who'd tried to destroy me over the decades. That man was still there, buried under years of comfortable retirement planning and family trust. And my sons were about to meet him for the first time. The next morning, I started assembling my team. First, I hired elite security services to provide 24-hour surveillance of my house and property. If Timothy and Benjamin were planning to accelerate their timeline for having me committed, they'd encounter more resistance than they'd bargained for. I also retained Morrison & Associates, a forensic accounting firm that specialized in corporate fraud investigations. I wanted official documentation of every penny my sons had stolen, every fake invoice they'd created, every illegal transaction they'd authorized. When this was over, there would be no question about who was the victim and who were the criminals. Finally, I met with 3 different criminal defense attorneys and provided them with copies of all the evidence Louise had gathered. I wanted to be prepared for any scenario, including the possibility that my sons might try to claim they were the real victims in this situation. But most importantly, I started positioning my pieces for the endgame. The pressure campaign from my sons intensified over the following week. They were getting bolder, more insistent, probably because they thought I was weakening under their constant manipulation. Timothy started showing up at my house almost daily, always with new brochures for assisted living communities and increasingly urgent arguments about why I needed to make a decision quickly. Dad, the best facilities have waiting lists, he explained during one particularly aggressive visit. If we don't get you on the list soon, you might end up somewhere that's not as nice as Sunset Manor. Sunset Manor, he'd finally mentioned it by name, confirming what I already knew from the contract Louise had found. I've been thinking about what you said. I told him, playing my role perfectly. Maybe you're right, maybe it is time to consider a change, but I have one condition. His eyes lit up with excitement. Of course, Dad, whatever you need. I want to meet with the doctors and administrators at this facility before I make any commitments. I want to tour the place, understand exactly what kind of care they provide, see what my living situation would be like. Absolutely, Timothy said, probably thinking this was the breakthrough he'd been waiting for. We can arrange that immediately. In fact, Amanda has already been in contact with their admissions department. Of course she had. They'd been planning this for months. There's just one other thing, I continued. I'd like to have a complete physical and mental health evaluation done first. I want to make sure I'm making this decision from a position of strength, not because I'm having any kind of age-related cognitive issues. Timothy's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. A legitimate medical evaluation wasn't part of their plan. They needed a corrupt doctor who would rubber stamp whatever diagnosis supported their agenda. That's probably not necessary, Dad. We're not talking about a medical facility. This is just a lifestyle change. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. But I insist, I said firmly. I want complete documentation of my mental and physical health from an independent medical professional. If I'm going to make a major life change like this, I want to be absolutely certain it's the right decision for the right reasons. Benjamin was brought in for the next phase of their campaign. He arrived at my house 3 days later with a man I didn't recognize, someone who introduced himself as Dr. Stevens and claimed to be a specialist in geriatric medicine. Dad, we brought Dr. Stevens to give you that comprehensive evaluation you wanted, Benjamin said with a nervous energy that suggested he wasn't comfortable with whatever deception they were pulling. I looked at this supposed doctor with his too young face and expensive briefcase. He couldn't have been more than 40 years old, which seemed pretty young to be a specialist in anything, let alone geriatric medicine. His manner was condescending in the way that suggested he was used to dealing with confused elderly patients who couldn't challenge his authority. I appreciate you coming to the house, I told him, but I'd prefer to have this evaluation done at a proper medical facility where you'd have access to all the necessary equipment and testing capabilities. Dr. Stevens smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. Oh, that's not necessary, Mr. Pierce. What your family is concerned about is your cognitive function and decision-making capacity. I can assess those things perfectly well with a simple office examination. There it was. They didn't want me in a real medical facility where legitimate doctors might interfere with their plan. They needed to control the environment and the outcome. What kind of assessment are we talking about? I asked, genuinely curious about how far they were planning to take this charade. Just some basic questions about your daily activities, your memory, your ability to manage financial decisions, Dr. Stevens explained, pulling out a clipboard with forms that looked official but probably weren't worth the paper they were printed on. Nothing to be concerned about. I decided to test him. What's your specialty exactly, Dr. Stevens? Where did you complete your residency in geriatric medicine? The question caught him off guard. I completed my training at several institutions. My focus is on cognitive assessment and capacity evaluation. That wasn't an answer. That was evasive double talk from someone who probably wasn't even a real doctor. Which institution specifically? I pressed. I'd like to verify your credentials before we proceed with any kind of medical evaluation. Benjamin jumped in quickly. Dad, Dr. Stevens is highly recommended by the administrators at Sunset Manor. He's done hundreds of these evaluations. Hundreds of fraudulent evaluations, I thought. This man was probably part of a larger scam that targeted wealthy elderly people whose families wanted them declared incompetent. I'm sure he has, I said calmly, but I'm still going to need to see some documentation of his medical credentials before we proceed. That's just common sense when dealing with any healthcare provider. Dr. Stevens started looking uncomfortable. I don't typically carry my medical licenses with me when I make house calls, but I can certainly provide that documentation at a later date. How about we schedule this evaluation for next week at your office? I suggested. That way I can verify your credentials beforehand and you'll have access to all your usual equipment and staff. The fake doctor exchanged a nervous glance with Benjamin. They clearly hadn't expected me to be this assertive about the process. Actually, Mr. Pierce, I think it would be more convenient for everyone if we just proceeded today, Dr. Stevens said, his voice taking on a more authoritative tone. Your family is understandably concerned about your well-being, and delaying this evaluation would only cause them more worry. Now we were getting to the real agenda. They needed to move quickly before I had time to verify anything or get a second opinion from legitimate medical professionals. I understand their concern, I replied calmly, but I'm not comfortable proceeding with a medical evaluation without proper verification of credentials. That's not unreasonable, is it? Benjamin was starting to look panicked. Dad, you're being paranoid. Dr. Stevens is a respected professional. We wouldn't have brought him here if we weren't confident in his qualifications. Then you won't mind if I take a few days to verify those qualifications, I said with a smile that I knew would irritate them. I'm sure Dr. Stevens understands that a prudent person always does their due diligence before making important medical decisions. The fake doctor clearly wanted to leave, but Benjamin wasn't ready to give up yet. Dad, this is exactly the kind of behavior that has us worried about you. You're being suspicious and argumentative about people who are just trying to help you. There it was, the setup for their incompetency claim. Any resistance I showed to their manipulation would be characterized as evidence of mental decline or paranoid behavior. I'm being careful, I corrected him. After 62 years on this planet and 45 years in business, I've learned not to make important decisions without all the facts. That's not paranoia, that's wisdom. Timothy arrived just as Dr. Stevens was packing up his fake credentials and preparing to leave. What's going on here, he demanded. Why isn't the evaluation proceeding as planned? Your father is being uncooperative, Dr. Stevens explained. He's refusing to participate in the assessment and making unreasonable demands about medical documentation. Dad, what's wrong with you? Timothy asked with genuine frustration. We're trying to help you, and you're acting like we're your enemies. I looked at my two sons, the men I'd raised, educated and trusted with my life's work, and I felt something I'd never experienced before as their father. I felt completely done with their manipulation and lies. You want to know what's wrong with me? I asked, standing up slowly and deliberately. What's wrong with me is that I'm not the confused old man you think I am. What's wrong with me is that I know exactly what you're trying to do, and I'm not going to make it easy for you. The room went completely silent. For the first time in months, I had their complete attention. I know about Sunset Manor, I continued, watching their faces go pale. I know you've already paid the deposit. I know about the lawyers and the real doctors you've consulted about having me declared incompetent. And I know this man isn't a doctor at all. Dr. Stevens started backing toward the door, clearly realizing that his cover was blown. Benjamin looked like he was about to throw up. Timothy's mouth was opening and closing like a fish out of water. How did you? Timothy started to ask, then stopped himself. How did I find out? I finished for him, because your mother was a lot smarter than any of us gave her credit for. Because she saw what you were planning before you even knew you were planning it. And because she left me everything I need to protect myself from my own children. I walked to the front door and held it open. Dr. Stevens, or whatever your real name is, you need to leave my house right now. And if I ever see you near my property again, I'll have you arrested for fraud and attempted elder abuse. The fake doctor practically ran to his car. Benjamin and Timothy stood in my living room looking like they'd just been hit by a truck. Dad, we can explain. Benjamin started. Explain what? I interrupted. Explain how you've been stealing money from the family businesses for years. Explain how you've been planning to lock me away in a nursing home so you can steal everything your mother and I built together. Explain how you see me as nothing more than an obstacle to getting money you think you're entitled to. Timothy found his voice first. You don't understand the pressure we're under, the debts, the problems, the people who are threatening us. We thought if we could just get control of the finances, we could fix everything. By stealing from me, I said flatly. By having me declared mentally incompetent and locked away like a sick animal, that was your solution to your problems. We weren't going to hurt you, Benjamin said weakly. Sunset Manor is a nice place. You would have been comfortable there. While you spent my money solving problems you created through gambling and drug addiction, I replied. While you liquidated everything your mother and I worked for to pay off loan sharks and drug dealers, the look of shock on their faces told me they hadn't expected me to know about their specific problems. They'd underestimated not just my intelligence, but also Louise's foresight and planning. How do you know about that? Timothy asked. Because your mother documented everything. I told them. Every theft, every lie, every secret meeting with criminals, every conversation you had about getting rid of me. She recorded it all, photographed it all, and left me enough evidence to destroy both of you completely. I walked to my safe, the one they didn't know about, hidden behind Louise's painting in the study, and pulled out one of the manila folders. Would you like to see the photos of you meeting with loan sharks, Timothy? Or maybe Benjamin would prefer to see the pictures of him buying drugs from dealers who are now blackmailing him. Benjamin sat down heavily on my couch, his face in his hands. Timothy just stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time in his life. What are you going to do? Timothy asked quietly. That depends entirely on what you're willing to do, I replied. Your mother left me a choice. I can destroy you both with the evidence she gathered, or I can give you one chance to save yourselves by becoming the men she always hoped you could be. What does that mean? Benjamin asked without looking up. It means you have 48 hours to return every penny you've stolen from the family businesses. Every fake invoice, every unauthorized withdrawal, every piece of equipment you've sold, all of it gets repaid with interest. It means you check yourself into legitimate treatment programs for your addictions. And it means you confess everything to the authorities and cooperate fully with any investigations. We don't have that kind of money, Timothy protested. The gambling debts alone are over $2 million, then you'll have to liquidate your inheritances to pay them, I said without a trace of sympathy. You created this mess with your greed and stupidity. Now you get to fix it, and if we don't, Benjamin asked. Then Monday morning, every newspaper in Cleveland publishes the full story of your crimes, complete with photographs and audio recordings. The FBI gets copies of everything, and I use the legal powers your mother left me to void your inheritances completely and have you banned from ever setting foot on any property owned by Pierce Family Enterprises. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. My sons sat in my living room like defeated children, finally understanding that their father wasn't the weak, confused old man they'd taken me for. This is impossible, Benjamin said. Speaking for the first time in several minutes, Mom left us those businesses in her will. You can't just take them back, wanna bet? I asked, pulling out the legal documents Charles had given me. Your mother was smarter than any of us realized. She created a corporate structure that makes me the majority shareholder of every business you think you inherited. On paper, you're not owners, you're employees, and employees who steal from the company get fired. I watched understanding dawn on their faces as they realized the magnitude of what Louise had done. She'd given them enough rope to hang themselves while secretly ensuring that I maintained ultimate control over everything we'd built together. Timothy was the first to grasp the implications. You mean we never actually owned anything? You own exactly what you've earned through honest work, I replied, which based on your performance over the past 3 years amounts to significantly less than nothing. But the will, Benjamin started, the will granted you operational control of individual subsidiary companies, I explained, enjoying the look of growing horror on their faces. But all of those companies are owned by Pierce Family Enterprises, and I own 100% of Pierce Family Enterprises. You've been working for me this whole time. You just didn't know it. Amanda chose that moment to make her entrance, probably expecting to find me signing commitment papers or at least agreeing to the nursing home placement. Instead, she walked into a room where her husband and brother-in-law looked like they just learned they were about to be executed. How did the evaluation go? She asked with that fake cheerfulness that made my skin crawl. Did Dr. Stevens find everything in order for the transition to Sunset Manor? Dr. Stevens left rather quickly when I started asking about his medical credentials. I told her. Turns out he's not actually a doctor. Imagine that. Amanda's face went through several interesting color changes as she processed this information. I don't understand. The administrators at Sunset Manor recommended him specifically. I'm sure they did, I said with a smile that could have frozen Lake Erie in July. They probably recommend a lot of fake doctors who help families commit elder abuse. It's probably quite a lucrative business. Elder abuse, Amanda repeated, trying to sound shocked. Richard, what are you talking about? Everything we've done has been out of love and concern for your well-being. I pulled out another photograph from Louise's collection, this one showing Amanda kissing Nicholas Thompson in the parking lot of the Marriott downtown. Is this love and concern for my well-being? I asked, holding up the photo so everyone could see it clearly. Or is this you planning to divorce my son as soon as you get your hands on what you think is his inheritance? Timothy's head snapped around to stare at his wife. What is he talking about, Amanda? Instead of answering her husband, Amanda tried to snatch the photograph from my hands. Where did you get that? You can't just spy on people. Actually, I can, I replied, easily keeping the photo away from her grasping fingers. Especially when those people are conspiring to commit crimes against me. Your husband might be interested to know that you've been having an affair with Nicholas Thompson for 8 months. He might also like to know that you've been stealing money from his accounts to pay for your relationship with Mr. Thompson. Timothy stood up slowly, looking at Amanda like she was a stranger. Is it true? Amanda's composure finally cracked completely. Timothy, you don't understand. I was going to tell you, after we got your father's situation sorted out, I was going to explain everything. Explain what? Timothy demanded. Explain how you've been cheating on me. Explain how you've been stealing from me. Explain how you've been planning to leave me once you thought I had access to millions of dollars. It wasn't supposed to happen this way, Amanda said, tears streaming down her face. But they weren't tears of genuine remorse. They were tears of frustration at getting caught. I pulled out another document from my collection. This might interest you, Timothy. It's a consultation agreement between your wife and a divorce attorney named Patricia Miller, dated 6 weeks ago. The retainer was paid with money from your joint checking account. Timothy read the document with growing disbelief. You hired a divorce lawyer 6 weeks after Mom died. I was protecting myself, Amanda said defensively. I knew you were having financial problems because of the gambling. I needed to know what my options were. Your options were to steal from your husband and plan to abandon him after helping to rob his father, I said coldly. Those were the options you chose. Benjamin, who had been silent during this exchange, finally spoke up. Dad, what you're saying about the corporate structure, are you serious? Do we really not own the businesses Mom left us? You want proof? I asked, walking to the phone. I dialed Charles Williams' number and put the call on speaker. Charles, it's Richard Pierce. I'm here with my sons, and I need you to explain the corporate structure Louise created. They seem to be having trouble understanding their actual legal position. Charles's voice came through clearly on the speakerphone. Certainly, Mr. Pierce. Timothy and Benjamin Pierce are listed as operational managers of Pierce Construction and Pierce Restaurants, respectively. However, both companies are wholly owned subsidiaries of Pierce Family Enterprises, which is a holding company owned entirely by Richard Pierce. The sons have no equity stake in the parent company and can be terminated from their management positions at any time by the parent company owner. And what happens to their inheritances if they're terminated? I asked. The inheritance they received was the right to manage those subsidiaries as long as they perform their duties satisfactorily. If they're terminated for cause such as theft, fraud, or breach of fiduciary duty, they forfeit all rights to those positions and any benefits associated with them. Timothy slumped back into his chair like a man who'd just been told he had terminal cancer. So we never actually inherited anything. You inherited the opportunity to prove yourselves worthy of eventually taking over the businesses, Charles continued over the speaker. But you also inherited the consequences of your actions if you proved yourselves unworthy. And have they proven themselves worthy or unworthy? I asked. Based on the evidence of systematic theft, fraud, conspiracy to commit elder abuse, and breach of fiduciary duty that you've shared with me, I would say they've definitively proven themselves unworthy, Charles replied. You would be well within your rights to terminate both of them immediately and pursue criminal charges. I hung up the phone and looked at my sons and daughter-in-law who were sitting in stunned silence. So here's where we stand, I said calmly. You have 48 hours to make a choice. You can try to save yourselves by returning the stolen money, entering treatment programs, and cooperating with law enforcement. Or you can lose everything and face criminal prosecution. Your choice. What about me? Amanda asked in a small voice. You? I replied with a laugh that held no warmth whatsoever. You're going to pack your things and disappear. You're going to divorce Timothy without asking for a single penny. And if I ever see you near this family again, I'll make sure everyone in Cleveland knows exactly what kind of person you really are. Amanda stood up with whatever dignity she had left, which wasn't much. This isn't over, Richard. You can't just destroy people's lives because you're angry. I'm not destroying anything. I replied calmly. I'm revealing what was already destroyed. The only question now is whether Timothy and Benjamin want to try to rebuild something honest from the wreckage, or whether they want to lose everything completely. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, but turned back one last time. Timothy, you don't have to listen to this. We can fight this together. We can get lawyers, challenge the corporate structure, prove that your father is manipulating the situation. Timothy looked at his wife for a long moment before answering. Get out, Amanda. Just get out of my house and don't come back. The finality in his voice surprised even me. For the first time since this whole mess began, Timothy sounded like a man instead of a weak child being led around by his nose. After Amanda left, the three of us sat in my living room in complete silence for what felt like an hour. Benjamin was the first to speak. Dad, I know we screwed up. I know we made terrible decisions and hurt you in ways we can never take back, but we're your sons. There has to be some way to fix this. I looked at him carefully, trying to see past the addiction and desperation to find any trace of the boy I'd raised. Do you want to fix this because you're genuinely sorry for what you've done, or because you're afraid of losing your inheritance? Both, he said honestly. I'm terrified of what's going to happen to me if I lose everything, but I'm also ashamed of the man I've become. The drugs, the debts, the lies, that's not who I wanted to be. Timothy nodded slowly. I keep thinking about what Mom would say if she could see what we've done to you, to the family, to the businesses you built. She'd be disgusted with both of us. Your mother was disgusted with both of you, I told them. That's why she spent her last months documenting your crimes instead of enjoying her remaining time with her family. You broke her heart before the cancer could finish the job. The words hit them like physical blows. Benjamin actually flinched, and Timothy's eyes filled with tears. We can't change what we did, Timothy said quietly. But if you give us a chance, we can try to make it right. Tell us what we need to do. I pulled out a legal pad and started writing. First, Timothy, you're going to call every loan shark, every illegal bookie, every criminal you owe money to, and you're going to arrange payment in full by the end of the week. You're going to liquidate every asset you have, your house, your cars, your investments, everything to pay those debts. That still won't cover everything I owe, he protested. Then you'll work out payment plans and you'll honor them by working legitimate jobs and earning legitimate money, I continued. No more stealing from the family businesses. No more fake invoices or skimmed cash. You'll work for your money like every other honest person in the world. I turned to Benjamin. You're going to check yourself into Riverside Recovery Center by this weekend. It's a legitimate facility with a real medical staff and a proven track record. You'll complete their full 90-day program, and then you'll continue with outpatient treatment for as long as they recommend. What about the dealers who are threatening me? Benjamin asked. You're going to cooperate fully with law enforcement to help them build cases against those dealers, I told him. Charles has already spoken with the FBI about your situation. They're very interested in what you can tell them about the drug trafficking operation you got involved with. They'll kill me if I testify against them. Benjamin said, panic creeping into his voice. Not if they're in federal prison, I replied. The FBI has been building a case against this particular group for 2 years. Your testimony will help them complete it. In exchange, you'll enter the witness protection program until the trials are over. Timothy looked up from the legal pad where I'd been writing. What happens after we do all of this? Do we get to keep our positions with the companies? That depends entirely on how well you perform over the next year, I told him. You'll be working as regular employees, not managers. You'll earn regular salaries, not executive compensation. You'll prove to me that you can handle responsibility before I give you any real authority. And if we prove ourselves, Benjamin asked, then maybe eventually you'll earn back the right to inherit what your mother and I built, I said. But that's going to take years of honest work and trustworthy behavior. One mistake, one lie, one attempt to steal or manipulate the situation, and you'll lose everything permanently. Over the next 48 hours, I watched my sons scramble to undo years of damage and stupidity. Timothy made dozens of phone calls to some very dangerous people, explaining that he would have their money by the end of the week. Some of those conversations were more pleasant than others. I could hear the threats and intimidation even from across the room. He put his house on the market immediately, pricing it to sell quickly rather than maximize profit. He sold both of his cars and his motorcycle. He liquidated his investment accounts and cashed in his life insurance policies. By Thursday afternoon, he'd managed to raise about $108 million in liquid assets. I'm still short about $400,000, he told me, exhausted from 3 days of nonstop financial maneuvering. The interest and penalties have been adding up while I was stalling. Then you'll work out payment plans for the remainder, I told him. And you'll honor those agreements by working legitimate jobs. What kind of work am I qualified for? He asked. I've been a construction company executive for 15 years. I don't have any real skills. You're going to learn real skills, I said firmly. You're going to start at the bottom of one of my construction crews and work your way up by proving you can handle responsibility. You'll earn $18 an hour to start, just like every other new hire. The look of shock on his face was almost comical. $18 an hour, Dad. I can't live on that. Then you'll get a second job, I replied without sympathy. Millions of people work multiple jobs to make ends meet. It builds character. Benjamin's situation was more complicated. He spent 2 days getting his affairs in order before checking into Riverside Recovery Center. The hardest part was arranging to meet with the FBI agents who would be handling his testimony against the drug dealers. I'm scared, Dad, he admitted the night before he entered treatment. What if the FBI can't protect me? What if these people find out I'm cooperating with law enforcement? Then you should have thought about that before you started buying drugs from dangerous criminals, I told him. You created this mess, Benjamin. Now you have to be brave enough to help clean it up. Will you visit me while I'm in treatment? He asked. If you successfully complete the program and cooperate fully with the FBI, then yes, I'll visit you, I said. But you have to earn that privilege by proving you're serious about getting clean and making amends. The weekend that Benjamin checked into treatment was the first quiet time I'd had in my house since Louise's funeral. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't dealing with manipulation, lies, or fake doctors trying to have me committed. I sat in my study, surrounded by the evidence of my family's betrayal, and tried to process everything that had happened. Charles Williams called on Saturday morning to update me on the legal proceedings. The FBI is very pleased with Benjamin's cooperation, he reported. His information has already led to 3 arrests in the drug trafficking operation. They're confident they can dismantle the entire network within the next few months. And his safety? I asked. He'll be in protective custody during treatment, and the witness protection program is already being arranged for after he completes the program. He should be safe as long as he continues to cooperate fully. What about Timothy's situation with the loan sharks? More complicated, Charles admitted. Some of these people don't care about payment plans or good intentions, but we've contacted law enforcement about the threats and intimidation. If any of them cross the line into actual violence, they'll be arrested. I hung up the phone feeling cautiously optimistic for the first time in weeks. My sons were finally taking responsibility for their actions, even if it had taken the threat of losing everything to motivate them. Timothy showed up at my house on Monday morning looking like he hadn't slept in days. His expensive suits had been replaced by jeans and a work shirt, and he was carrying a lunch bucket that looked suspiciously like the one I'd used when I was starting out in construction 45 years ago. I start work today, he told me. Joe Martinez is going to be my foreman. He said he remembers when you hired him 20 years ago. Joe Martinez was one of my best crew leaders, a man who'd worked his way up from laborer to supervisor through honest effort and skill. If anyone could teach Timothy what real work looked like, it was Joe. What did you tell him about why you're starting at the bottom? I asked. The truth, Timothy replied, that I'd made some serious mistakes and needed to learn the business from the ground up. He said he'd treat me like any other new hire, which means I'll be carrying materials and digging ditches until I prove I can handle more responsibility. I was surprised by his honesty. I'd expected him to come up with some face-saving story about wanting to learn the practical side of the business. How do you feel about that? I asked. Timothy was quiet for a moment before answering. Scared, he said finally. I haven't done real physical work since I was a teenager helping you with weekend projects. I don't know if I can handle it. You'll handle it or you won't, I told him. But either way, you'll learn something important about yourself. He left for his first day of honest work in over a decade, and I went to my office to start implementing the other changes I'd been planning. The first order of business was conducting a complete audit of both companies to document the full extent of the damage Timothy and Benjamin had caused. I brought in Morrison & Associates, the forensic accounting firm, to trace every fraudulent transaction and quantify the total losses. The results were even worse than I'd expected. Over the course of 3 years, Timothy had stolen approximately $2.8 million, from Pierce Construction through fake invoices, unauthorized bonuses, and direct cash theft. Benjamin had been more subtle but equally destructive, using his position to facilitate money laundering for his drug dealers while taking a cut of every transaction. The total damage to both companies was just over $4 million, money that should have gone to legitimate business expenses, employee benefits, and growth investments. But there was good news too. The businesses themselves were fundamentally sound. The employees were skilled and loyal, the customer relationships were strong, and the operational systems were efficient. The only problems had been at the executive level, where my sons had been bleeding the companies dry to fund their personal disasters. I called an all-hands meeting for both companies on Wednesday morning. Every employee, from the newest laborer to the most senior project manager, gathered in the main conference room at Pierce Construction headquarters. I want you all to know that there are going to be some significant changes in how these companies operate. I began. Some of you may have heard rumors about financial irregularities and management problems. Those rumors are true. I could see worried looks on faces throughout the room. These people depended on their jobs to feed their families, and they were probably afraid that the company was in trouble. Timothy Pierce and Benjamin Pierce are no longer in executive positions with either company, I continued. They violated their fiduciary responsibilities and caused significant financial damage that we're still quantifying. The room was dead silent. Many of these employees had worked with my sons for years. However, I went on, both companies remain financially stable and operationally strong. Your jobs are secure, and we're going to be implementing some improvements that should make working here even better. I outlined the changes I was planning: profit-sharing bonuses for all employees, improved health insurance, additional paid time off, and a tuition reimbursement program for employees who wanted to develop new skills. These companies exist to serve our customers and support our employees. I told them not to fund the personal problems of management. That's going to change permanently. The response was immediate and positive. These were working people who understood the value of honest labor and fair compensation. They'd been watching the executive level chaos with concern, but they were relieved to know that the business itself was stable. After the meeting, several employees approached me individually to express their support and to share information about irregularities they'd noticed but hadn't felt comfortable reporting. "Mr. Pierce," said Maria Santos, one of our project coordinators, "I'm glad you're taking control of the situation. Some of us were worried about invoices that didn't look right, but we didn't know who to talk to about it. From now on, you talk to me," I told her. "And I want you to know that anyone who reports problems or irregularities will be protected and rewarded for their honesty." That afternoon, I received a call from Joe Martinez about Timothy's first day on the construction crew. "Mr. Pierce, I wanted to give you an update on your son," Joe said. "I've got to be honest, I wasn't sure what to expect. A lot of these executive types can't handle real work." And I asked. "He surprised me," Joe admitted. "He showed up on time, he followed orders without complaining, and he worked hard all day. His hands are probably hamburger by now, and I know his back is killing him, but he didn't quit." "How are the other workers treating him?" "Some of them are giving him a hard time." Joe said honestly, they remember when he was their boss, and they're not sure what to make of him being on their crew now. "But a couple of the older guys are helping him out, showing him the ropes. What's your assessment? Will he make it?" Joe was quiet for a moment. "Ask me again in a month. But if he keeps showing up and keeps working like he did today, he's got a chance." Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into rebuilding and improving both companies with an energy I hadn't felt in years. It was like being 35 again, back when every day brought new challenges and opportunities to build something better. I hired additional supervisors to ensure better oversight of all financial transactions. I implemented new accounting systems with multiple approval levels for any expenditure over $1,000. I established anonymous reporting systems so employees could flag irregularities without fear of retaliation, but the most important change was cultural. I started spending time at job sites again, talking with workers, listening to their concerns, understanding their challenges. I realized that during the years when Timothy and Benjamin were supposed to be running the companies, I'd become disconnected from the day-to-day operations that made everything possible. The employees responded enthusiastically to my renewed involvement. They appreciated having someone in charge who understood their work and valued their contributions. Productivity increased, customer satisfaction scores improved, and for the first time in years, both companies were operating at full potential. Benjamin called me from the treatment center every Tuesday and Friday as required by his program. The conversations were difficult at first, stilted exchanges where he clearly didn't know what to say, and I wasn't sure I wanted to hear it. But gradually, something started to change in his voice. The desperate, manipulative tone that had characterized our interactions for years was being replaced by something that sounded more genuine. "Dad, I need to tell you something," he said during one of our calls. "The counselors here have been helping me understand how my addiction affected everyone around me, not just me. I never really thought about how my actions were hurting you and Mom." "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean, I was so focused on my own problems, my own needs, that I never considered what it must have been like for you to watch your son destroying himself and lying about it. I never thought about how much pain I was causing you both." This was the first time in years that Benjamin had talked about our relationship in terms of anything other than what he needed from me. "Your mother knew about your addiction before I did," I told him. "She tried to talk to you about it several times." But you always denied there was a problem. I remember he said quietly, I was so angry at her for interfering in my life, but she was just trying to save me from myself. She never stopped loving you, I said. Even when she was documenting your crime, she was hoping you'd turn things around before it was too late. Do you think it's too late now? He asked. I considered the question carefully before answering. I think it's too late to undo the damage you've done. But it's not too late to become the man your mother always hoped you could be. Timothy's transformation was more visible but equally difficult. After 2 weeks on Joe Martinez's crew, his hands were covered with calluses and his body was adapting to the physical demands of construction work. More importantly, his attitude was changing in ways I hadn't expected. He stopped by my house one evening after work, still wearing his work clothes and covered with dust from the job site. I wanted to thank you, he said without preamble. Thank me for what? For not just firing me and walking away, he replied, for giving me a chance to prove I can change. You haven't proven anything yet, I told him. 2 weeks of honest work doesn't make up for 3 years of theft and deception. I know that, he said. But it's a start, and for the first time in years, I feel like I'm actually earning what I get paid. He told me about his day, about learning to operate a backhoe, about helping pour concrete for a foundation, about the satisfaction of completing a project and seeing tangible results from his efforts. The other workers are starting to accept me, he said. Not as their former boss, but as another member of the crew. It feels good to belong to something honest. I studied my older son, looking for signs of the manipulation and entitlement that had characterized his behavior for so long. But what I saw was a man who was genuinely trying to change. Even though the process was difficult and humbling, Joe Martinez speaks well of your work, I told him. He says you're learning quickly and following directions without arguing. Joe's a good teacher, Timothy said, and he doesn't cut me any slack because I'm your son. If anything, he's harder on me than the other new guys. That's probably good for you. Yeah, it is, Timothy agreed. I needed someone to treat me like I had to earn respect instead of just expecting it because of my last name. That night, for the first time since Louise's funeral, I felt something that might have been cautious optimism about my family's future. 3 months after Benjamin entered treatment and Timothy started working construction, I began to see real changes in both of my sons. The transformation wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was the slow, steady progress of men who were finally taking responsibility for their lives. Benjamin completed his 90-day inpatient program and moved into a supervised halfway house while he waited for the witness protection arrangements to be finalized. His testimony had already led to the arrest of 12 people in the drug trafficking organization, and the FBI was preparing for the major trials that would dismantle the entire operation. The counselors say, I'm ready for outpatient treatment, he told me during one of our regular phone calls, but I'll be continuing with therapy and support groups for at least another year. How do you feel about that? I asked. Grateful, he said, and I could hear genuine emotion in his voice. 6 months ago, I would have resented anyone telling me I needed that much supervision. But now I understand that addiction is something I'll be managing for the rest of my life, and you're okay with that. I'm learning to be okay with it, Benjamin replied. The alternative is going back to the life that almost destroyed everything and everyone I care about. Timothy's progress was more visible but equally significant. After 3 months of manual labor, his body had adapted to the physical demands of construction work, and his attitude had undergone a complete transformation. Gone was the entitled executive who expected special treatment because of his last name. In his place was a man who understood the value of honest work and earned respect. Joe Martinez called me on a Thursday afternoon with an update. Mr. Pierce, I think it's time to talk about promoting Timothy to assistant crew leader, he said. He's proven himself over the past 3 months, and the other workers respect him now. What changed their minds about him? I asked. He had a choice about 3 weeks ago, Joe explained. We had a new guy on the crew, young kid, maybe 20 years old, first construction job. He was struggling, making mistakes, and some of the other workers were giving him a hard time. What did Timothy do? He took the kid under his wing, Joe said. Started staying late to help him learn the equipment, covered for his mistakes until he got better, even brought him lunch a few times when the kid was too broke to buy his own food. That's when the crew knew Timothy was one of them, not just some rich boy playing at being a worker. I was surprised by the story. The old Timothy would never have taken time to help someone who couldn't benefit him in return and his work quality. Solid, Joe said without hesitation. He's not the fastest guy on the crew, but he's reliable, careful, and he follows safety protocols. I'd trust him to supervise other workers. I authorized the promotion, but with conditions. Timothy would continue to work regular hours for regular pay, with no special privileges or executive perks. He would earn additional responsibility only by demonstrating continued trustworthiness and competence. The real test came when Timothy found out about his promotion. I expected him to see it as the first step toward reclaiming his executive position. Instead, his reaction surprised me. Joe says I'll be training new workers and helping coordinate between crews. He told me when he stopped by my house that evening. It's good to know I'm earning back some trust. Is that how you see it? Earning back trust. Timothy was quiet for a moment before answering. Dad, I know it's going to take years before you can trust me with real responsibility again. Maybe you never will. But this promotion tells me that I'm moving in the right direction, and what direction is that? Becoming the kind of man Mom would have been proud of, he said simply. That answer meant more to me than any apology or promise he could have made. Meanwhile, the business improvements I'd implemented were paying dividends beyond what I'd expected. Both companies were more profitable than they'd been in years. Employee satisfaction was at an all-time high, and our reputation in the Cleveland construction and restaurant industries was better than ever. I decided it was time to start thinking about the future beyond just repairing the damage my sons had caused. Louise and I had always talked about establishing a foundation to help working families in Cleveland, and I finally had the financial resources and organizational structure to make that dream a reality. I called Charles Williams to discuss the legal framework for establishing the Louise Pierce Foundation for Working Families. The foundation would provide emergency financial assistance to employees who faced unexpected medical bills, job loss, or other family crises. It would also offer scholarships for the children of working families who wanted to pursue higher education or vocational training. Your wife would have loved this idea, Charles told me. She always believed that successful businesses had a responsibility to support the communities that made their success possible. She was right, I said, and I should have done this years ago. The foundation's first major initiative was establishing emergency assistance funds for the employees of both Pierce companies. Any worker who faced a genuine financial crisis, medical emergency, family death, house fire, or similar catastrophe could apply for grants up to $10,000 with no requirement to repay the money. The response from employees was overwhelmingly positive. For the first time, they felt like they were working for a company that genuinely cared about their well-being beyond just their ability to perform their jobs. But the foundation's most important project was still in the planning stages. I wanted to create a comprehensive program to help families affected by addiction and gambling problems, the kinds of issues that had nearly destroyed my own family. The program would provide counseling, financial planning assistance, legal support, and job training for family members who were ready to rebuild their lives after addiction had caused damage. It would be a way to help other families avoid the pain and betrayal that Louise and I had experienced. As I worked on developing these programs, I found myself thinking about the larger purpose of everything Louise and I had built together. The money was important, but it was really just a tool for creating something more meaningful, a legacy that would help other families stay strong when facing the kinds of challenges that had nearly torn ours apart. 6 months after the confrontation that changed everything, Benjamin was released from witness protection and returned to Cleveland. The major drug trafficking trials had concluded with convictions across the board, and the organization that had been threatening him was permanently dismantled. For the first time in years, he was free to rebuild his life without looking over his shoulder. He looked different when I picked him up at the halfway house. Cleaner, healthier, but also older somehow. The desperate, shifty energy that had characterized him during his worst addiction years was gone, replaced by something quieter and more thoughtful. Dad, I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, he said as we drove toward my house, but I was hoping I could start working for one of the companies again. Not in management, just as a regular employee. What kind of work are you interested in? I asked. Anything honest? He replied immediately. The counselors at the treatment center helped me understand that I need to rebuild my life from the ground up. I want to start with a job where I can earn my way back to respectability. I'd been thinking about this conversation for weeks, trying to decide how much trust I was ready to extend. Benjamin had completed his treatment program successfully, cooperated fully with law enforcement, and maintained his sobriety for over 6 months. But addiction recovery was a lifelong process, and one good stretch didn't guarantee future success. There's an opening in the restaurant management training program, I told him. It's a 6-month program where you'd rotate through every position: dishwasher, prep cook, server, cashier, assistant manager. If you complete it successfully, you'd be qualified to manage one of our smaller locations. You'd trust me with that kind of responsibility, he asked, surprise evident in his voice. I'd trust you to earn that kind of responsibility, I corrected. The program includes random drug testing, financial oversight, and performance evaluations every 2 weeks. Any problems, any signs of relapse, any dishonesty about anything, and you're terminated immediately. Benjamin nodded slowly. That's more than fair. When can I start? Monday morning, 6 a.m. at the downtown location. You'll be working for Maria Santos, and she doesn't know you're my son. As far as she's concerned, you're just another trainee who needs to prove himself. That weekend, I had dinner with both of my sons for the first time since Luis's funeral. Timothy arrived straight from work, still wearing his construction clothes and carrying the lunch bucket that had become his trademark. Benjamin came in a borrowed suit that was too big for him, carrying a notebook where he'd been writing questions about the restaurant business. The conversation was awkward at first. We'd spent so many months focused on problems and consequences that we'd forgotten how to just talk as a family. But gradually, something like normalcy began to emerge. "How's the construction crew treating you?" Benjamin asked Timothy. "Better than I deserve," Timothy replied honestly. "Most of them have accepted me as just another worker, but I know some of them still remember when I was their boss. It's going to take time to earn back their respect completely." "Do you miss the executive position?" Benjamin asked. Timothy considered the question carefully. "I miss the money," he said finally, "but I don't miss the pressure or the temptation to cut corners when things got difficult. And I definitely don't miss lying awake at night, worrying about gambling debts." "Are you still going to Gamblers Anonymous?" I asked. 3 meetings a week, Timothy confirmed. "My sponsor says it'll probably be years before I feel completely confident about my recovery, but every day without gambling is a victory." Benjamin nodded understanding. "The addiction counselors told me something similar about drug recovery. It's not about being cured, it's about choosing sobriety every single day." After dinner, we sat in the living room where everything had started, where I'd confronted them with Louise's evidence, where they'd finally understood the consequences of their actions. But this time, the atmosphere was different. Instead of anger and desperation, there was something that might have been hope. "Dad, can I ask you something?" Timothy said. "Do you think Mom would be proud of the progress we've made?" It was a question I'd been asking myself for months. "I think your mother would be cautiously optimistic," I told them. She always believed people could change if they were willing to do the hard work. But she was also realistic about how difficult it is to rebuild trust after it's been broken. "What would it take for you to trust us again?" Benjamin asked. I looked at my sons, men in their 30s who were finally learning lessons they should have learned in their 20s. "Consistency," I said simply. "Not just weeks or months of good behavior, but years of proving that the changes you've made are permanent. Actions, not words. And if we prove that," Timothy asked, "then maybe eventually you'll earn back the right to inherit what your mother and I built together," I said. "But that's going to require demonstrating not just that you can avoid making mistakes, but that you can actively contribute something positive to the businesses and to the community." Over the following weeks, I watched both of my sons throw themselves into their new roles with an intensity I hadn't seen since they were teenagers. Timothy's work on the construction crews earned him increasing responsibility and respect. Benjamin attacked the restaurant training program with the dedication of someone who knew he was getting his last chance to prove himself. The real test came when both companies faced unexpected challenges. A major construction project ran into permit delays that threatened to put us behind schedule and over budget. One of our restaurant locations was hit with a health department citation that required immediate remediation and retraining of staff. In the past, Timothy and Benjamin would have either panicked or tried to shift blame to others. This time they stepped up. Timothy worked overtime to coordinate with city officials and find creative solutions to the permit problems. Benjamin volunteered to spend his days off helping retrain the restaurant staff and implementing new food safety procedures. Neither of them asked for recognition or special compensation for their extra efforts. They just did what needed to be done because it was the right thing to do. 1 year after Louise's death, I stood in the cemetery where she was buried, holding a financial report that would have made her proud. Both companies had achieved record profits, employee satisfaction was at an all-time high, and the Louise Pierce Foundation had already helped over 200 families in the Cleveland area. But the numbers on the page weren't what mattered most. What mattered was that Timothy and Benjamin had spent 12 consecutive months proving they could be trusted with increasing responsibility. Timothy had been promoted twice and was now supervising 3 construction crews. Benjamin had completed his restaurant training program and was managing our busiest location downtown. More importantly, both of them had maintained their sobriety and continued their recovery programs without any lapses or excuses. "Louise, I think they're going to make it," I said quietly to her headstone. "It took almost losing everything, but I think our boys are finally becoming the men you always believed they could be." That afternoon, I called both sons to my office for a conversation I'd been planning for months. "I've been reviewing your performance evaluations for the past year." I began looking at the detailed reports I'd requested from their supervisors. "Maria Santos says Benjamin is the most dedicated manager she's worked with in 15 years. Joe Martinez says Timothy has the best combination of technical skill and leadership ability of any crew supervisor he's trained." Timothy and Benjamin exchanged glances, but neither of them said anything. They'd learned not to assume that good performance automatically translated to rewards or recognition. "I've also spoken with your addiction counselors and sponsors," I continued. "They confirm that you're both maintaining your recovery programs and making genuine progress in addressing the underlying issues that led to your problems." "Dad, what are you saying?" Benjamin asked cautiously. I'm saying that it's time to discuss the future, I replied. Not the immediate future. You're both going to continue in your current positions for at least another year. But the long-term future of the businesses and your potential roles in them. I pulled out a legal document I'd been working on with Charles Williams for weeks. This is a new succession plan, I explained. It outlines the conditions under which you could eventually regain executive responsibilities and ultimately inherit ownership of the companies. Timothy leaned forward in his chair. What kind of conditions? Continued sobriety, verified by regular testing and counselor evaluations. Demonstrated competence in progressively responsible positions. Financial transparency and accountability in all business dealings. And most importantly, a commitment to the values and principles that your mother and I tried to build these companies on. I handed them each a copy of the document. This isn't a guarantee, I emphasized. It's a roadmap. If you continue on your current path for another 2 years, you'll be eligible for middle management positions. After 5 years of consistent performance, you could be considered for executive roles. After 10 years, we'll discuss ownership succession. Benjamin looked up from reading the document. 10 years of proving that the changes you've made are permanent, I confirmed. 10 years of building trust not just with me, but with your employees, customers, and the community. 10 years of demonstrating that you've learned the difference between being entitled to something and earning it. And if we fail to meet these standards at any point, Timothy asked, then you'll have good jobs with good companies for as long as you want them, I said, but you won't inherit executive responsibility or ownership. Those privileges have to be earned every day. Over the following months, both sons threw themselves into their work with renewed purpose. They knew they were being evaluated not just on their immediate performance, but on their potential to eventually lead the companies Louise and I had built. Timothy started taking night classes in business management and construction technology. He wanted to understand not just the practical aspects of construction work, but the theoretical and strategic elements that would be necessary for executive leadership. Benjamin enrolled in a community college program for restaurant management and began studying food service technology, supply chain management, and customer relationship systems. He also started volunteering with addiction counseling programs, helping other people who were struggling with the same issues he'd overcome. The most significant change, though, was in how they related to the employees they supervised. Instead of seeing workers as subordinates to be managed, they began to understand their roles as leaders who were responsible for creating environments where other people could succeed. Dad, I had an interesting conversation with one of my crew leaders yesterday, Timothy told me during one of our monthly check-ins. He said something that really made me think. What was that? He said that for the first time in his 20-year career, he feels like management actually cares about whether workers go home safely every day, not just whether they finish projects on time. How did that make you feel? Proud, Timothy said, but also responsible. I realized that the way I treat people doesn't just affect me, it affects their families, their attitudes about work, their willingness to give their best effort. Benjamin had similar insights from his restaurant management experience. I'm learning that customer service isn't just about being polite, he told me. It's about creating an experience that makes people want to come back and tell their friends about us. And how do you create that kind of experience? By taking care of the employees first, he said. If the staff feels valued and supported, they'll naturally provide better service to customers. But if they feel like they're just replaceable parts in a machine, that attitude shows up in everything they do. These weren't revolutionary business concepts, but they were revelations for my sons. They were finally understanding that successful leadership meant serving others, not just commanding them. As we approached the 2nd anniversary of Louise's death, I found myself feeling something I hadn't experienced in years, genuine optimism about my family's future. Not the blind hope of a parent who refuses to see his children's flaws, but the earned confidence of a man who had watched his sons transform themselves through hard work and genuine commitment to change. The Louise Pierce Foundation had grown beyond anything I'd originally envisioned. What started as a simple employee assistance program had evolved into a comprehensive support system that was making a real difference in the Cleveland community. We'd helped families avoid foreclosure when breadwinners were injured on the job. We'd provided scholarships for over 50 children of working families to attend college or vocational schools. We'd funded emergency medical expenses that would have bankrupted families dealing with cancer, heart disease, and other serious health problems. But the program I was most proud of was the Addiction Recovery Initiative that Benjamin had helped design. It provided comprehensive support for families dealing with gambling, drug, and alcohol problems. Not just treatment for the addicted person, but counseling and financial assistance for family members who were affected by the addiction. Dad, I want to show you something, Benjamin said during one of our monthly foundation meetings. He handed me a letter from a woman named Sarah Martinez, whose husband had been struggling with alcohol addiction for 3 years. The foundation didn't just pay for my husband's treatment, the letter read. They helped me understand that I wasn't responsible for his addiction, and they gave me the tools I needed to protect myself and my children while he was getting help. For the first time in years, I feel like we have a future. How many families are we helping with addiction issues now? I asked. 47 active cases, Benjamin replied. But the real success stories are the families where the addicted person completes treatment and the whole family learns healthier ways to communicate and support each other. It struck me that Benjamin was speaking from personal experience. Our family had been one of those success stories, though it had taken us longer and cost us more than most families would have to endure. Timothy had also found ways to contribute to the foundation's mission through the construction side of the business. He'd developed a program that provided free home repairs for elderly residents and families with disabled members. We completed 12 accessibility modifications last month, he reported. Wheelchair ramps, bathroom modifications, stair lifts, things that make it possible for people to stay in their homes instead of being forced into assisted living facilities. How are you funding the materials for these projects? I asked. We negotiate bulk discounts with suppliers and use donated labor from employees who volunteer their weekend time. Timothy explained, the actual cost to the foundation is about 30% of what families would pay for the same work, and the employees are willing to work for free. Timothy smiled. Dad, when people feel like their work has meaning beyond just earning a paycheck, they'll do amazing things. Half our crew leaders have volunteered for the accessibility projects, and some of them bring their own tools and equipment. This was the kind of leadership thinking that gave me confidence in Timothy's long-term potential. He understood that business success wasn't just about profit margins, it was about creating value for customers, employees, and the community. The financial results supported this approach. Both companies continued to grow and prosper, but more importantly, they were becoming known throughout Cleveland as employers that treated workers fairly and contributed meaningfully to community well-being. Charles Williams called me one afternoon with news about a business opportunity that would test everything we'd built over the past 2 years. Richard, I've been contacted by a development group that's planning a major mixed-use project downtown, he said. Residential condos, commercial space, restaurants, retail. They're looking for local contractors, and they specifically asked about Pierce Construction. How big a project are we talking about? $85 million total development. If you got the construction contract, it would be about $35 million over 18 months. The largest single project in your company's history. I felt the familiar excitement that came with major business opportunities, but I also felt something else. Caution. A project that size would strain our resources and require perfect execution. Any significant problems could threaten the financial stability we'd worked so hard to achieve. What's your assessment of the risk factors? I asked Charles. Manageable if you have the right leadership team in place, he replied. But you'd need experienced project managers who could handle the complexity and scale. That evening, I discussed the opportunity with Timothy and Benjamin. I wanted to gauge not just their interest, but their understanding of what such a project would require. It would mean hiring at least 50 additional workers, Timothy said thoughtfully. We'd need to expand our equipment fleet, possibly lease additional warehouse space for materials storage. The restaurant component would require us to open 3 new locations simultaneously, Benjamin added. We'd need to train management teams for all of them, which means expanding our training program significantly. So you both understand the challenges, I said. The question is whether you think we're ready to take on something this ambitious. Timothy was quiet for a moment before answering. Dad, 2 years ago, I would have said yes immediately without thinking about the risks. I would have seen the potential profits and ignored everything else. And now I think we should spend at least a month analyzing every aspect of the project before we make a decision, he said. We should talk to employees about whether they're ready for that kind of expansion. We should model different scenarios for what happens if the timeline slips or costs exceed projections. Benjamin nodded agreement. We've built something good here, something stable that takes care of a lot of families. We shouldn't risk that without being absolutely certain we can handle the expanded responsibility. Their responses impressed me. They were thinking like business owners, not just opportunity seekers. They understood that growth had to be sustainable and that taking care of existing employees and customers was more important than chasing maximum profits. All right, I said, Timothy, you'll lead the construction analysis. Benjamin, you'll evaluate the restaurant opportunities. I want comprehensive reports in 30 days, and then we'll make a decision as a team. For the first time since Louise's death, I was including my sons in major strategic decisions. Not because they were my sons, but because they'd earned the right to contribute to important business choices. The next 30 days were intense. Both Timothy and Benjamin approached their strategic analyses with the thoroughness of seasoned executives, but also with the caution of men who understood what it meant to lose everything through poor decisions. Timothy assembled a team of his most experienced crew leaders to evaluate the construction requirements. They spent weeks reviewing architectural plans, calculating labor needs, assessing equipment requirements, and identifying potential risks. His final report was 47 pages of detailed analysis that impressed even Charles Williams. The project is technically feasible, Timothy concluded during his presentation. We have the core expertise and most of the equipment we'd need, but we'd be operating at the absolute limit of our capacity for 18 months, which means zero margin for error. What's your recommendation? I asked. We should bid on it, but with very specific conditions, he replied. Extended timeline to accommodate our learning curve on a project this size, penalty clauses that protect us if the developers change specifications mid-project, and milestone payments that ensure we don't get overextended financially. Timothy's analysis showed understanding not just of construction processes, but of business risk management and financial planning. He was thinking like an owner, not just a project manager. Benjamin's restaurant analysis was equally thorough. He'd researched the downtown market, analyzed foot traffic patterns, studied the competition, and created detailed financial projections for each of the 3 proposed locations. The restaurant component could be very profitable, he reported. Downtown dining is growing, especially in the business lunch and upscale dinner markets. But opening 3 locations simultaneously would require hiring and training about 85 new employees. Do we have the management capacity for that kind of expansion? I asked. Not currently, Benjamin admitted. We'd need to promote 3 current managers to regional supervisor roles and hire experienced restaurant managers for each new location. It would mean restructuring our entire management hierarchy. And your recommendation? Take the restaurant contract, but negotiate a staggered opening schedule, he said. Open the first location 6 months into the construction timeline, the second location 3 months later, and the third location when construction is substantially complete. That gives us time to train management teams properly and adjust our systems based on early results. Both sons had demonstrated strategic thinking that balanced opportunity with prudence. They understood that sustainable growth was more important than rapid expansion that could threaten the stability we'd achieved. I reviewed their analyses with Charles Williams and 2 independent business consultants before making a final decision. Their recommendations show remarkable maturity, Charles told me. They're not thinking like entrepreneurs who want to swing for the fences. They're thinking like stewards of a business that supports a lot of families. After a week of consideration, I made the decision to pursue the project, but with the conditions Timothy and Benjamin had recommended. We submitted a bid that was slightly higher than our competitors, but included detailed explanations of our approach to risk management and quality control. 3 weeks later, we got the contract. They said our bid demonstrated the kind of careful planning and experienced leadership they wanted for a project this important. Charles reported when he called with the news. They were particularly impressed with the staggered restaurant opening schedule. The announcement that Pierce Construction and Pierce Restaurants would be handling the major downtown development created excitement throughout both companies. Employees understood that this project would provide job security and growth opportunities for years to come. But I also used the announcement to make something clear to everyone involved. This project will test everything we've built over the past 2 years. I told the assembled employees, our reputation, our financial stability, our ability to work together as a team, all of it will be on the line for the next 18 months. Timothy Pierce will be the overall project coordinator for the construction work, I continued. Benjamin Pierce will oversee the restaurant development. They've earned these responsibilities through consistent performance and demonstrated competence. I could see the recognition and respect in the employees' faces. These weren't nepotism appointments, they were promotions based on merit. But I want everyone to understand that this project succeeds or fails based on all of our efforts, I emphasized. Timothy and Benjamin will be coordinating and planning, but every worker, every supervisor, every manager will be contributing to something that could define our company's future. After the meeting, both sons approached me privately. Dad, this is a huge opportunity, but also a huge responsibility, Timothy said. If we mess this up, it's not just our careers on the line, it's the jobs and financial security of everyone who works for us. Are you worried you're not ready for that responsibility? I asked. Benjamin answered first. 2 years ago, we would have been focused on how this project could benefit us personally. Now we're thinking about how to make sure it benefits everyone who depends on these companies. That's exactly the kind of thinking that gives me confidence in your leadership potential, I told them. Understanding that leadership means serving others, not just commanding them. The project officially began the following Monday. Timothy and Benjamin threw themselves into the work with an intensity that impressed everyone involved. They arrived early, stayed late, and approached every decision with the careful consideration of people who understood the stakes. But more importantly, they worked together as a team in ways they'd never managed before their crisis. Instead of competing for attention or credit, they collaborated to solve problems and share information that benefited both parts of the project. Watching them work together reminded me of Louise and me during the early years of building our businesses. The same focus, the same commitment, the same understanding that success required both individual effort and team cooperation. For the first time since Louise's death, I felt confident that the empire we'd built together would survive and thrive long after I was gone. Not because of the money or the businesses themselves, but because my sons had finally learned what it meant to be worthy stewards of something bigger than themselves. 6 months into the downtown development project, we faced our first major crisis. A winter storm system stalled over Cleveland for 8 days, dumping 3 feet of snow and bringing construction to a complete halt. The weather delay threatened to push our timeline back by at least a month, which would trigger penalty clauses and potentially cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars. Timothy convened an emergency meeting with all crew leaders and supervisors to develop a recovery plan. "We can't control the weather," he told the assembled team, "but we can control how we respond to setbacks. I need ideas for how to make up lost time without compromising safety or quality." The solutions that emerged from that meeting demonstrated the kind of collaborative problem-solving that had become the hallmark of our company culture. Workers suggested extended shifts during good weather, simultaneous interior work while exterior crews waited for conditions to improve, and creative scheduling that maximized productivity during the shortened daylight hours of winter. "We'll need to authorize significant overtime pay," Timothy told me when he briefed me on the recovery plan, "probably an additional $200,000 over the next 2 months. And if we don't authorize the overtime," I asked, "we'll miss our milestone deadlines, pay penalty fees to the developers, and potentially lose the opportunity to bid on future projects with this development group," he replied. "What's your recommendation?" Timothy didn't hesitate. "Authorize the overtime. Our reputation is worth more than short-term cost savings, and these workers have earned the right to benefit when they go above and beyond to solve problems they didn't create." I approved the overtime budget, and the results exceeded our expectations. Not only did we make up the lost time, but the collaborative effort to solve the weather crisis had strengthened the bonds between management and workers. Employees felt valued and respected, which translated into higher productivity and better quality control. Benjamin faced his own challenges on the restaurant side of the project. The first location, which had opened successfully 4 months earlier, was exceeding revenue projections by 25%. But the success created a new problem. We were having difficulty finding and training qualified managers for the second and third locations. "The restaurant industry has a chronic shortage of experienced managers," Benjamin explained during one of our weekly project reviews. "Everyone wants to hire people with proven track records, which makes it almost impossible for good workers to move up into management positions. What's your solution?" I asked. "We're going to develop them internally," he said. "I've identified 6 current employees who have management potential. We'll put them through an intensive training program and promote them to assistant manager positions. Then we'll hire experienced general managers who can mentor them." "That sounds expensive and time-consuming." "It is," Benjamin admitted, "but it's also an investment in employee loyalty and long-term stability. These people will understand our culture and values because they've been part of building it." The internal management development program became one of our most successful initiatives. The employees who were selected for management training were fiercely loyal to the company because they understood that we were investing in their careers, not just filling positions. More importantly, the program created a pathway for advancement that motivated other employees to improve their performance in hopes of being selected for future training opportunities. "Dad, something interesting happened yesterday," Benjamin told me during one of our monthly check-ins. "Maria Santos asked me if the management training program was going to be permanent, not just for this project. What did you tell her?" "I told her I hoped so, but that it would depend on whether we could continue to afford the investment," Benjamin replied. "She said the employees have been talking about it and they're willing to contribute part of their own time to training if it means more advancement opportunities." That conversation led to the creation of our formal career development program, which became a recruiting advantage that helped us attract and retain the best workers in Cleveland's competitive restaurant market. By the end of the project's first year, both the construction and restaurant components were ahead of schedule and under budget. More importantly, the project had become a showcase for our company's capabilities and values. Other developers started approaching us about future projects. Restaurant industry publications wrote articles about our innovative management training programs. The Cleveland Chamber of Commerce recognized our companies as Employers of the Year for our commitment to worker development and community involvement. But the recognition I valued most came from an unexpected source. Joe Martinez, the construction foreman who had been training Timothy, asked to meet with me privately. "Mr. Pierce, I've been working construction for 25 years," he said. "I've seen a lot of companies and a lot of managers. I wanted you to know that your son Timothy has become one of the best project coordinators I've ever worked with. What makes you say that?" "He listens to people," Joe replied. "When workers have problems or suggestions, he pays attention instead of just giving orders. And when something goes wrong, he focuses on fixing it instead of finding someone to blame. Those are important leadership qualities." "Yes, sir, they are," Joe said. "But the thing that impresses me most is that he never forgets. He used to be just another worker on the crew. He treats everyone with respect because he remembers what it's like to be treated badly." That evening, I called both sons to my office for a conversation I'd been planning for months. "The downtown project will be completed in 6 months," I began. "Your performance has exceeded my expectations in every measurable way. The question is, what happens next?" Timothy and Benjamin exchanged glances, but neither of them spoke immediately. "I've been thinking about that too," Timothy finally said. "This project has taught me that I enjoy building things, not just buildings, but teams and systems and relationships that create value for everyone involved." Benjamin nodded agreement. "I feel the same way about the restaurant business. It's not just about serving food, it's about creating experiences that bring people together and providing opportunities for employees to build careers." Their answers confirmed what I'd been observing for months. They weren't just working to regain their inheritances anymore. They discovered genuine purpose in their roles as leaders and stewards of enterprises that served others. "I've made a decision about your future roles in the companies," I told them. "But first, I want you to understand what this decision is based on." I pulled out their original succession plan and placed it on the desk between us. 2.5 years ago, you were both on a path toward losing everything, your inheritances, your freedom, possibly your lives, I said. "The plan your mother and I developed required you to prove yourselves worthy of trust and responsibility over a period of years." Timothy looked at the document, then back at me. "Have we proven ourselves worthy? You've exceeded the requirements we established," I replied. "But more importantly, you've discovered something neither money nor authority can provide: genuine purpose in your work and respect from the people you lead." I opened another folder containing new legal documents. "Effective immediately. Timothy, you're being promoted to Vice President of Construction Operations. Benjamin, you're now Vice President of Restaurant Development." These aren't honorary titles. They come with real authority, real responsibility, and real accountability to our employees and customers. Benjamin's eyes widened. "Dad, are you sure we're ready for that level of responsibility?" "I'm sure you've earned the opportunity to prove you're ready," I corrected. "There's a difference between being given something and earning the right to try." Timothy picked up his new job description and read through the responsibilities carefully. "This says I'll be overseeing all construction projects and managing the entire construction workforce." "That's right. About 200 employees will be depending on your leadership and decision-making ability," I confirmed. "Are you prepared for that responsibility?" "I think so," Timothy said thoughtfully, "but I also know that I'll need to keep learning and growing to handle it well." "That's exactly the right attitude," I told him. "The moment you think you know everything you need to know about leadership, you'll stop being effective as a leader." Benjamin was studying his own promotion documents. "This includes authority to open new restaurant locations and develop new business strategies, within budget parameters and with board approval," I said. "You'll have real autonomy, but you'll also be accountable for results." "What about the 10-year timeline in the original succession plan?" Benjamin asked. "That timeline assumed you'd need 10 years to prove you could handle responsibility without supervision," I explained. "You've demonstrated that level of trustworthiness in less than 3 years." The timeline was about earning trust, not serving a sentence. Over the following months, both sons grew into their new roles with confidence that impressed everyone who worked with them. Timothy restructured the construction division to improve communication between project teams and implemented safety protocols that reduced workplace accidents by 40%. Benjamin developed a strategic plan for restaurant expansion that would add 6 new locations over the next 2 years, while maintaining the quality and culture that made our existing restaurants successful. But the changes I was most proud of were in how they related to their employees and their community responsibilities. Timothy started an apprenticeship program that partnered with local high schools to provide construction training for students who couldn't afford college. The program guaranteed job placement for students who successfully completed the training, creating a pipeline of skilled workers while providing opportunities for young people from working families. Benjamin established a culinary scholarship fund that helped restaurant employees pursue additional training in food service management, culinary arts, and business administration. Several employees had already completed degree programs with scholarship support and been promoted to management positions. The most important thing I learned during my recovery Benjamin told me during one of our quarterly reviews, is that helping other people succeed is more satisfying than any amount of personal achievement. And how does that philosophy affect your management style? I asked. I measure my success by how well the people who work for me are doing, he replied. If they're growing professionally, earning good money and feeling valued, then I'm doing my job well. Timothy expressed similar sentiments about his approach to leadership. I used to think being a manager meant telling people what to do and making sure they did it. Now I understand that leadership means creating conditions where people can do their best work and achieve their personal goals. The downtown development project was completed 2 weeks ahead of schedule and $300,000 under budget. The restaurant components were all operating profitably within their first 6 months. The project became a model for other developers who wanted to work with contractors and restaurateurs, who understood how to balance profitability with community responsibility. More importantly, the project had established our companies as leaders in Cleveland's business community. We were no longer just successful local businesses, we were enterprises that other companies studied and tried to emulate. The Louise Pierce Foundation had also grown beyond anything I'd originally envisioned. We were now helping over 150 families annually with emergency assistance, addiction recovery support, educational scholarships, and home accessibility modifications. The foundation had become a permanent institution that would continue Louise's legacy of caring for working families long after all of us were gone. On the 3rd anniversary of Louise's death, I stood once again at her gravesite, this time accompanied by Timothy and Benjamin. We'd established a tradition of visiting together on this date to reflect on the changes in our lives and our family. Mom would be amazed by what we've built, Timothy said quietly. Not just the businesses, but the relationships and the community programs. I think she'd be most proud of how we learned to work together as a real family, Benjamin added. Not just people who happen to be related, but people who genuinely care about each other's well-being and success. I looked at my son's men who had transformed themselves from selfish, addicted criminals into leaders who understood that success meant serving others. The transformation hadn't been easy or quick, but it had been complete and genuine. Your mother knew this was possible, I told them. That's why she left us the tools we needed to save our family. She believed we could become better than we were. 5 years after that devastating reading that nearly destroyed our family, I sat in my office reviewing financial reports that would have seemed impossible back then. Both companies had tripled their revenue, employed over 500 people, and maintained the highest employee satisfaction ratings in Cleveland's construction and restaurant industries. The Louise Pierce Foundation had become a model for corporate philanthropy, helping over 300 families annually and inspiring other businesses to develop their own community support programs. We prevented dozens of foreclosures, funded hundreds of educational scholarships, and helped more than 150 people overcome addiction problems that might otherwise have destroyed their families. But the numbers on those reports weren't what made me proudest. What mattered most was the phone call I'd received that morning from Timothy. "Dad, I wanted you to know that we just got the contract for the new children's hospital project," he said, excitement clear in his voice. "It's a $50 million project over 2 years. That's wonderful news," I told him. "What convinced them to choose us?" "They said our reputation for safety, quality, and community involvement made us the obvious choice," Timothy replied. But they also mentioned that they'd heard about our apprenticeship programs and wanted to work with a company that was invested in developing the next generation of skilled workers. After I hung up, I reflected on how different that conversation was from the desperate phone calls I'd received 5 years ago when Timothy was scrambling to pay gambling debts. The man who called me about the hospital contract was focused on building something meaningful, not just making money to solve problems he'd created. Benjamin stopped by my office that afternoon with news about the restaurant division. "We're opening our 10th location next month," he reported. But more importantly, 5 of our current managers are graduates of our internal training program. We're creating real career opportunities for people who might not have had them otherwise. "How many of your employees are participating in continuing education programs now?" I asked. 47 people are taking classes in business management, culinary arts, or hospitality management with our scholarship support, Benjamin said proudly. "And 3 of them are on track to open their own restaurants as franchisees within the next 2 years. That afternoon, Charles Williams came by with legal documents that represented the final step in a process that had begun with Louise's dusty envelope. "These are the updated succession documents," he explained. "They formalize Timothy and Benjamin's positions as your eventual successors, but with the corporate governance structures that will ensure the companies continue to operate according to the values you and Louise established." I reviewed the documents carefully. They included provisions requiring all future ownership transfers to maintain the employee benefit programs, community support initiatives, and ethical business practices that had become our company's defining characteristics. What happens if future leadership tries to eliminate these programs to increase profits? I asked. They can't, Charles replied. The corporate charter requires board approval for any changes to community programs, and the board includes employee representatives who would never approve eliminating benefits or reducing charitable activities. And if someone tries to sell the companies to outside buyers, the employees have right of first refusal to purchase through an employee stock ownership plan, he explained. Louise's vision was that these companies should always serve the people who make them successful, not just the people who own them. That evening, I had dinner with Timothy and Benjamin and their families. Timothy had remarried 2 years earlier to a woman named Carol, who worked as a nurse and shared his commitment to community service. Benjamin was engaged to Linda, a teacher he'd met through one of our foundation's education programs. As we sat around my dining room table, the same room where I'd confronted them with evidence of their crimes 5 years ago, I marveled at how completely our family dynamics had changed. Uncle Richard, tell us the story about the envelope again, asked Timothy's 8-year-old stepson Danny. Over the past 2 years, the story of the dusty envelope had become a family legend that we shared with the children to help them understand that people could change and that families could overcome even the most serious problems. Well, I began, once upon a time, your dad and Uncle Benjamin made some very bad choices that hurt our family. But Grandma Louise was very smart, and she left a special envelope that helped us learn how to be a real family again. What was in the envelope? Danny asked, even though he'd heard the story dozens of times. Love, I said simply. It was full of love that looked like money and papers and photographs, but was really just Grandma Louise's way of protecting our family and helping us learn to take care of each other. After dinner, Timothy and Benjamin stayed to help clean up, and we found ourselves alone in the kitchen where this whole journey had begun. Dad, can I ask you something? Benjamin said as he dried dishes. Do you ever regret not just turning us over to the police that first day? It would have been easier than spending years watching us prove we could change. I considered the question carefully before answering. Your mother once told me that love isn't about doing what's easy, it's about doing what gives people the best chance to become who they're meant to be. And do you think we became who we were meant to be? Timothy asked. I looked at my sons, men who had transformed themselves from selfish criminals into leaders who measured their success by how well they served others. Men who had learned that real strength came from building others up, not tearing them down. I think you became exactly who your mother always believed you could be, I told them. It just took longer than any of us hoped. That night, as I sat in my study surrounded by photos of Louise and our family, I realized that the dusty envelope hadn't just contained money and evidence and legal documents. It had contained something much more valuable, a second chance for all of us to discover what family really meant. Louise had given us the tools to save ourselves, but more than that, she'd given us the opportunity to become better people than we'd ever been before. The empire we'd built together had grown far beyond construction companies and restaurants. We'd built something that would last long after all of us were gone, a legacy of caring for others and creating opportunities for people to build better lives. And it all started with a dusty envelope that looked like trash but contained the greatest treasure any family could hope for. The chance to love each other despite our failures and become worthy of that love through our choices. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the worst betrayals, and the strongest families are forged not in comfort, but in the fire of shared struggle and genuine forgiveness. Real wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or business empires, it's measured in the number of people whose lives are better because you chose to use your strength to lift others up rather than tear them down.